Well, good evening. It's good to see each and everyone out this evening, and as you can tell, I'm going to be speaking from here so that my big head won't get in the way and block out all the pretty pictures that we'll have for you. If you do feel like you want to move around the auditorium, just take a few minutes or a few seconds to do that. You're welcome to do that if you want to get a good view. But the purpose for tonight is to present to the church a report from the trip that myself and my wife were able to take, and it was a blessing that she could accompany me on the trip because of just an extra set of eyes and being able to understand things, and also with regards to some of the work that we've got going. It was just good to have her there as well, and she was a great asset to me on the trip, and together we were able to talk about things and get a clear picture of what we see happening. So this is a report to the church, and I do hope that at the end, if you have any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer them. We're going to give you some information. That's one of the reasons we're not live streaming tonight, because I want to be able to just tell you some things that as I see them, and so I'm glad that you've all come out this evening to hear this. The first thing I want to do before we get into the trip is first of all say thank you to the church for allowing this to be a possibility. It's something that I had planned earlier last year, and knew that it would be a good time around the pre-New Year or after New Year to make the trip because of some of the plans that we did have, and so the Lord opened it up basically to be gone for most of January. We're actually gone for 3 weeks. Also, I want to thank Pastor Geist and Brother Josh Hauer and Brother Loy Hauer and Brother Eric Bowden for preaching in my absence, and doing a good job there, and I appreciate that. It gives great liberty to be able to head out and to take the time, not feel the constraint to have to be back, and it enabled us to really take in some things that we went there. We had a purpose on this trip, and the purpose was not a vacation. The purpose was to visit with the Wallies, first of all, our missionaries, our evangelists in the Philippines, and talk to them about their plans for the coming year, which I'll be telling you about. And also, because of those plans, to address the continuation of the ministry that they have in the Philippines, their publishing ministry, which is a tremendous ministry, providing materials for preachers and churches, not only throughout the Philippines, but even in the Southeast Asia and other countries where they're able to print most of what we have here, but doing it a lot cheaper in the Philippines, and providing a real service. And none of us wanted to see that come to an end as the Wallies would come off the field. And so there's a young couple, you've probably heard about them. We needed to physically meet them, and I'll explain as we go along why that was necessary. But we had a very profitable time there, got a lot of answers as to the wishes of the Wallies and so forth. And then our second purpose was to go to Fiji, with the COVID pandemic coming to an end, and travel into that country, once again, a reasonable possibility. We wanted to go back and see, well, where are things lying? Because as you know, 3 years ago we had our brother Jeremiah, who was there and doing a great work, and the whole country just literally shut down, and it was not possible to continue. But we want to continue there, so I wanted to go and see and talk to some of the pastors there and get their ideas and their wisdom, and to see what God would do. And I got answers to those questions, I believe, and even some more, which I'm excited, and I'll be sharing that with you. Well, let me give an outline of the trip here, put a map up, and it was quite a trip. We departed on January the 3rd, and we flew from Seattle, first of all to Incheon, Korea, just for a layover, and then we flew down to Cebu in the center part of the Philippines. That's where the Wallies are, and we spent about a week in each place, And then after we were through with Cebu, we flew down to Australia. We flew, first of all, with a layover in Port Moresby, New Guinea. Not sure if I would be an ambassador for New Guinea Airways, but it was a safe trip, all told, and we then flew to Brisbane in Australia. To fly from the Philippines to Fiji, you have to go through Australia. And since I set foot on my home soil, I took a little break. We went down south to Victoria, where I came from and where I was born and so forth, and spent some time with my family there, particularly to see my mother. And I appreciate the many who asked after her, and we'll give a report about that as well. Then we flew back up to Brisbane, and from Brisbane we flew to Fiji, an overnight red-eye flight. It's only about 3 hours and 20 minutes. Flew to Fiji, got there in the early hours of the morning, and we spent the last almost a week there in Fiji. Of course, this was a very fast-moving trip. We didn't have a lot of time for sightseeing or whatever, just mainly meeting with people and talking about things and preaching and so forth. And then from Fiji, we flew back to Seattle via LAX and completed the circuit. And as I said, it was quite a trip, but praise the Lord for a very good trip, one of the better trips I've taken as far as travel is concerned. And the Lord has enabled us to come back with good health. And as I said to somebody, even the temperature was the same if you just ignored the F and the C. In other words, over there it was like 28 degrees Celsius. And here it's 28 degrees Fahrenheit. But that's just par for the course. Well, let's talk about the trip. And first of all, the Philippines. This was the first phase of the trip, and probably the main purpose for the trip was to be able to go to the Philippines. And as I said, we came to the city of Cebu, which is a very large modern city now in the centre part of the country. I'm sure many of you, or some of you at least, have probably been there. We had our flights delayed slightly, so it was around 11:30 at night when we landed at the Cebu Mactan Airport on Mactan Island, and brother and sister Wally were there to pick us up, which was good. They took us to our hotel, and the next day we were pretty well adjusted to start getting into things, and we just had a tremendous time of fellowship and planning. It was a really sweet time. I thought, well, maybe there's a lot of things to hammer out as far as what the Wallies are doing, but praise the Lord that they had, we talked about it, a number of things prior to my coming. Here's a picture of where they are living, and this house they moved into last year from a much larger facility. This is where the Wallies live, this is where the printing ministry is, and it's also where this young couple that I'll mention here in a moment living as well. And after the Wallies come back, the house is rented, leased for a 3-year period, so the printing ministry will remain there. It's in a fairly secure area. Of course, in the country of the Philippines, there's bars on all the windows and high fences, and as far as the Wallies are concerned, there's the most savage Rottweiler you could ever imagine down in the back there, and thank the Lord it's chained. I was hoping it wasn't like the maniac of Gadara who could break the chains, because that dog does not act friendly, even though he's a friend of Brother Wally, and I'm sure that it's a different relationship there. So one of the things we did there in visiting with the Wallies was to talk about their plans for their return to the States and their retirement. They've been on the field for a long time, served the Lord faithfully, and it is time for them to come off the field and to spend the rest of their days with family in Oklahoma and reconnecting with their family and so forth. So this is a big change, and it's not been an easy change because their heart really is in the Philippines, particularly with Brother Wally. Now, Mrs. Wally, she's worn out, she's tired, she has health problems and gets around with a walker and so forth. And so it's not as easy for her, but I know if it was up to her husband, he would just stay there, but he, like any good husband, pays attention to the needs of his wife. And so we sat down, we talked about a lot of the logistics of that, as far as what their wishes were in flying back. Did they want to stop off in Korea to visit their grandsons? Did they want to stop off in Japan and visit a supporting church there? But the answer was pretty quick coming. They just want to come straight back to the States and spend a little time here in Oak Harbor and then head off to Oklahoma. So that was an easy decision, made it easy for me. And then we talked, there's another picture there of, we're a little ahead of ourselves there, but just in their living room, talking about things, encouraging Brother Wally, okay, it's time now 6 months is going to go really quick, and you need to call tomorrow after I leave, you need to call a moving company, get a quote on what it would take to pack up whatever you need to bring back and put it in a container, and let's get some prices, let's make some plans there. So hopefully by now he's on that, and then there's a lot of different aspects, as you know, with any major move. So that's what we talked about there. We also talked about the plans for the ministry, the Philippine Baptist Outreach publications, and I think most of you are aware that whenever the last time the Wallies were here, they went back to Cebu. I said to them that they really don't need to start a church because I knew their time was coming to an end at some point as far as active ministry is concerned. And so I said there's no point really starting a church. And so what they've done there for the last 3 or 4 years now is maintained this and expanded this printing ministry, which now located in the centre part of the country. It makes it a lot easier to get the booklets and manuals and so forth sent out, but also they've had a ministry of helps with some of the churches in the area. They've been able to attend the meetings, do preaching, they've been able to visit other churches for preachers' meetings, and so they've been very, very busy. And up until the COVID pandemic, they had a really great ministry in the Cebu City Jail. Brother Josh would tell you about that. He got to preach there, and I got to preach there. And of course, that shut down completely, and it still is shut down as far as the COVID restrictions are concerned. But we talked about the publications ministry, and then, of course, we came to meet this young couple. And here's a photo of Brother Jericho, and he's standing by their photocopier and their risograph printing machine. Those of you who help out in our ministry here, you're probably looking and say, that's a small risograph. Well, that's what they've got there, and they print the same materials we print. And Brother Jericho is going to take over this ministry. Now, the thing here is, of course, the Wallies are members of our church, all right? So they're under our authority. And so now with Jericho and his wife taking over, they're not members of our church. And that was one of the reasons I needed to go there and talk to them and make sure that we're on the same page spiritually and doctrinally and so forth, but also to establish some, it's not the right word, but to establish some ground rules as to how they are to operate the ministry. In a sense, from a totally unspiritual point of view, they are working for us as contractors. But their heart is in the ministry, and I'm sure, if it were possible, which it's not, they'd gladly become members of our church. But we needed to establish a relationship there. The next frame will show his wife. This is the room. It's an air-conditioned room that they have in their house. And you can see she's showing off their collating machine. It's just like one we had here. We've got a better one now. We've got an air suction one here, but she's pointing to that, and then some of the other instruments that they use or tools that they use for bookbinding and so forth. And as I said, they not only print all of our materials, preacher training materials and discipleship materials, but they will print tracts for different churches. They print songbooks. They do a lot of other things as well. And it's just a great ministry, and we didn't want to see that come to an end just because the Wallies left the field. And so I was glad that we were able to talk with Jericho and his wife Anne, and we had a great understanding. One of the things I asked Jericho to do was to write out their testimony, and I've put this up on the slide here. I'll read it out as we go along. It's 4 slides, but I just want you to give you as much as I can an idea of their heart and their testimony. He said, first of all, we would like to say thank you for the privilege that has been given to us. Anne grew up in a Christian family, and she was the one that God used so that I could hear the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ 5 years ago. Anne was saved when she was 9 years old and was baptized in a Bible-believing Baptist church in Bantayan Island. I, Jericho, was saved 5 years ago and was baptized also in the same church on Bantayan Island. I was working before as a marketing sales supervisor while Anne was working in the accounting staff in the same company. 3 years ago we were married, and we prayed that God would always be the centre of our relationship. When the pandemic came, due to the restrictions, our employment stopped, so we volunteered ourselves to help in the printing ministry for a few months. A missionary, Wayne Wally, and Mam Wally, Donna Wally, asked us if we would be willing to take over the printing ministry since they were already planning to retire. We didn't say yes to the proposition, but instead we prayed for the will of God. A couple of months later, God spoke to our hearts, leading us to continue the ministry, and we know it is the Lord's will to do anything for him and for his glory. We believe that this printing ministry must never be stopped by any means, because all the books and resources that the ministry is printing are founded upon the strong and sound doctrines and principles from the precious Word of God. And that's Brother Jose L. Jericho. He goes by the name Jericho, and Sister Ann Palazzo. They're a sweet couple, and I was very impressed with them, their dedication, their joy, and I have every confidence in the world that when the Wallies do leave the field, that the ministry will continue. And so I think that was one of the things about this trip that was necessary and was accomplished. Now, we had some really good times of fellowship, and it was important not only to have a business-type relationship, but to have a personal relationship. And so we got to know Anne and Jericho very well. He was kind of the chauffeur for most of our jaunts around the city. And so we had good times of fellowship, not only with the Wallies and the Palazzos, but there was a little bit of fellowship my wife enjoyed with one of their dogs named Skeeter, who's an inside dog and kind of a fun dog, although a little bit of a rascal. When the Wallies had gone away, he pushed through the wire screen and tried to get out of the house, but other than that, kind of a nice little puppy there. So when we went to the Philippines, I knew one thing, that I was going to be preaching once in the Philippines. And so on the first Sunday that we were there, we went to Smyrna Baptist Bible Church, and that's in Compostela. That's part of the greater Cebu area. It's a huge city spread out, and the pastor is Jose Ugsama, and there's a picture of him there. This church is it's kind of interesting to get to the church. You have to drive down some lanes and then down some other smaller lanes, and then finally you have to stop about 30 yards from the entrance to the church and then step through the mud and the puddles and everything to get where the church meets. And it meets really under a carport roof. You can see a picture here of Brother Ugsama and his wife, Marie Dole. She goes by the name Ging, I guess, Ging. And you can kind of make out the building where they meet for church. It's somewhat open air, at least at one end. It adjoins an apartment building, and my wife reminded me tonight that they live in a room that's probably the size of one of our classrooms. And the Ugsamas have not only husband and wife, but they have 5 teenage boys, well, almost teenage, they have 5 boys, all of which one is a teenager, I should put it that way. So, and they're still facing as a church an unhappy landlord who says, I want you out of here. And this is a sad thing. A lot of times these churches, they get to meet in a certain place, and the landlord wants to put the rent up, or he wants to, he can see that he can make money by converting it into a more productive, financially productive property. And so, it's one of the struggles that this church endures. But there are a number of good men there. I want to show you some of these men, and there were others, but these in particular I wanted you to see. On the left there is a man that goes by the name of Boboy, and then to my, whatever side it is, on the other side, on the right, there is Alden and Julius. Now these 3 men were saved in the jail ministry out of Cebu City Jail. And, it's hard for us to even imagine or comprehend what that jail is like. It's nothing like the Island County Jail, which would be like a 5-star hotel compared to that jail. It's just a high-rise building. It houses over 7,000 prisoners. When you see the building, they're all got their hands on the chicken wire or the wire and different. It's just packed. And when you go up to the top to where they have a rooftop place to preach, you're stepping over prisoners in the stairwells and everything. It's just an amazing thing. But with the current president of the Philippines, he clamped down on drug peddlers and so forth, and a lot of them are in jail. And yet, because of the ministry of the gospel, these men got saved, they got out of jail, and now they're training for the ministry. Isn't that wonderful? And so I know Brother Wally would have had a hand in that prior to the shutdown of the jail. I met there was another man who doesn't attend here, but he came over to be part of the meetings. I didn't get a picture of him, but there are about 4 men that are being discipled and preparing to train for the ministry. And so we're thankful for that. A couple other pictures here from the group. Here is what I think is surely the world's shortest song leader. Brother Nicholas Flores. I would love to have he and Brother Burmester up here on the platform. He is a tiny man, but I tell you what, he's got a booming voice and an enthusiasm that gets people singing. And he's just a bundle of energy. And I just thought I have to get a picture with him. He was a great joy and big smile on his face and so forth. The next slide is a picture of the family of the Uxamos. Now, these are all living in a very small area. My wife said, I don't even know where they sleep. But it's one of those areas that you have just a kitchen, and that's the living area. It's hard to imagine, but they really are, they're sacrificing for the Lord, and they do it with a smile. There's no complaining, there's no griping, there's no saying, well, we don't have all the comforts of home. All of these boys are active in the church, and it was just good to see, and so we had this picture here. And so we had a good time preaching there on Sunday morning, and I think I taught Sunday school as well. Brother Ugsama preached in the afternoon, and then we did something that was a little unusual for me. They had a lady who had surrendered to become a Sunday school teacher. Now, if somebody said that I want to become a Sunday school teacher here, we'd be saying, gladly, here's the class, let's go. But there it's not an ordination service, but they do have the lady come, and they asked me to pray for her publicly and dedicate her ministry. Well, she's the wife. Her husband is in jail, and he's there for a long, long time. He is saved, but he has to fulfill his sentence, and now she is faithful, and she got saved after he got saved, and now she's teaching in a class. So these are things that really touch your heart, because you see people who, it's very easy for us to say, well, how could we live like that? How could people live in this way where they're going without so much, but they don't know that, so you don't tell them. you just take it in and you say, you know what, God can do great things if we're willing, and these people are very, very willing. Well, the word got out that I had preached there, and I think some of you may have seen on Facebook, I'm not sure, but another church heard I was in town, so they organised an unexpected meeting, and they gave me one of those unexpected honours. They called me Dr. Sargent. So, well, if you know me, that's the last thing I would want, although it kind of sounds good. Maybe we should. No. I get called doctor every now and then, and I've learned, don't argue, just don't say anything, just smile and get on with it. But the pastor there is a man I had met before the last time I was in the Philippines, Frank Denisi, and he pastors the Gospel of Christ Baptist Church. And so he called an impromptu Tuesday night meeting, and you can see some of the crowd there. That's just one half of the crowd, but a lot of people came, some from other churches, and I was able to preach on stewardship. Now, I've learned one thing: when you travel as a preacher, there are three things you have to be ready to do. That's to preach, to pray, and to die. And so I'm used to preaching the old-fashioned way with typed notes, but I quickly learned that you have a tablet, and you can use a tablet and be a modern preacher. And so anyway, we had sermons sort of in line. You never go away without that, but one of the things that's very difficult for me is just to preach an old sermon. You know, it never comes out the oven the same way. So trying to be fresh, trying to prepare, it's a challenge, but it's a joy. And we had a great time there. He said to us, he said, come early and we'll feed you before the meeting. But the person bringing the food in was late. He said, do you like Italian food? And we're thinking, yeah, we like Italian food. So we had to wait till after the meeting. And one thing in the Philippines, especially, in a lot of places, is everybody wants you to sign their Bibles. I've got about 15 pictures of different groups, people coming up, and they have a deaf ministry there as well. Down the back there, interpreting in sign language, and had a lot of people come and want to sign Bibles. It's, you know, you have to almost get pulled away from them because you've signed one, next thing, and another Bible and a pen is handed to you. And so that's good, and my wife was also involved in signing Bibles as well. But that was my preaching in the Philippines, so I got to see another church and met some of the pastors. This pastor Denisi, his dad was a missionary in the Philippines, and he's actually from Boston area. So he is a Filipino, but he's got a little bit of American culture in him. And he just got married, so his wife, she was away, and she came in at the end. So we got to meet his wife, and we had Italian food. It was pizza. That was about it. But anyway, it was just a fun evening, just a great time. And speaking of food in the Philippines, some have already said, well, what did you eat there? Well, honestly, we were so limited in time and so busy that most of the time we just ate at the Wally's house, and Anne is a great cook. She just gets in the kitchen, and like most of our Filipino folks here in the church, they just keep it coming. It was just really good food. I know we all like Filipino food, right? Amen. All right, so we know what that is, and there's always rice, but there's other dishes. And one of the things that we did for Anne, and we went out and bought her a crock pot. And you'd think, well, that's a wonderful thing, but to a Filipino over there, what's a crock pot? What is that for? And we really had to encourage her to use it, because they go off to church. They are members, by the way, at Smyrna Baptist Bible Church there with Brother Ugsama, and it's a fair drive. It's probably a half-hour, 40-minute drive to get there. And to me, a crock pot is just a normal thing. You put it on, go to church, come back, you got delicious food. And finally, she did use it, and she said, "Oh, this is great." So, but we wanted to be a blessing to them. While I was there, I bought we bought, I should say, we bought Brother Jericho a brand new laptop, i7, 1 terabyte hard drive, so that he can use that for the ministry. And so it was a blessing. It was a blessing to us to be a blessing to them. And talking to him about setting up the ministry for the future and some of the things I would like to see them do and so forth, but we'll wait till they're totally in charge and we'll make those adjustments, I'm sure. But she provided food, but we did go out to a couple of nice restaurants. In fact, on the day we flew out, as we're headed to the airport, we went to a nice restaurant there, and you can see really good food. And here's the thing about the Philippines, some of you know this, you can see this menu here, or kind of part of a menu. That's the dish I got, and it's the El Salvador Cordon Bleu. And it's, what does it say there, 305 pesos. That's about $5.55. So life is a little less expensive in the Philippines. And so as we left, we took the Wallies and the Palazzos out, treated them to dinner at a really nice restaurant, or a lunch I should say, and then we head for the airport. Apart from the food though, having lots of water is essential in a place like the Philippines. And appreciate the Wallies. They have this is a 10-gallon, I think, or I think it's around, no, it's so many litres anyway, but we had that. We went through about 3 of them in the 5 days we were there. Got to drink, keep drinking the water. That's essential. Anytime you go on a missions trip, I know we've done it with our young people, is you just keep that water going, because it is hot there. Although weather-wise it would have been rather cool for most of the population, because there was a low-pressure system that was over the city, and it just kind of hovered there, and most of the days it was cloudy, which kept the temperature a little lower, and it rained every day, usually during the night. I think there was one night there was a lot of thunder and so forth, but anyway, that was the visit there. Now let me give you the plans that we have come up with here for the Wallies. First of all, Brother and Mrs. Wally will be arriving here in the US on Monday, July the 31st. They'll actually fly out on the 31st. They're flying into time, and so they'll be landing in Seattle, and then we'll get them up here to Oak Harbor on the 31st. And they're going to spend 2 weeks here in Oak Harbor with the church. And after the 2 weeks, I think on the 14th of August, they're going to fly to Oklahoma. They have tickets for all of that. While I was there, pulled out the old credit card and I bought them tickets from Cebu to Oklahoma City. And as a treat and as an honour for the faithful service that they've rendered, we bought them business class all the way. And that'll be a comfortable flight, but it's also pretty much a necessary flight in many ways, because Mrs. Wally would find it hard to be sitting on the regular airline seats for such long flights. But I felt like, it costs a little bit more, a lot more actually, but they deserve it, I think. And so we bought the tickets. They're all bought. They're all set in stone. They are coming back on the 31st of July. And when you think about it, that's now only about 5.5 months. They'll come quicker than we think. Once they leave Oak Harbor, their plan is to spend time reconnecting with their family in Oklahoma City. As you know, they've got a daughter, a son there. They've got grandchildren, and they've got some great-grandchildren. And they've not been a part of the Wally's life for a long time. And that's one of the sacrifices that evangelists who travel overseas often have to make. But they need to really reconnect with their family, and they'll be doing that. And probably up until the new year, they'll just take that time just to relax and acclimatise to the US. I mentioned yesterday, and please keep this as a private matter, don't put it on a social media, but what we would like to do when they're here for that 2 weeks is to present them with the keys to a brand new car. And that car would be waiting for them in Oklahoma. And we want to do that and as a surprise to them, so that when they get back there, they can just get in their car and have a vehicle. As far as their retirement is concerned, they have Social Security, and we know everybody can live on Social Security quite comfortably, but they also have the proceeds from the sale of their house. And the house was sold here in Oak Harbor just as the market was starting to decline, but we got a good price for that, and they owned the house, so it was all pretty much, apart from the taxes and everything else, but it was, they got some money there, and if it's used wisely, they'll, especially living in Oklahoma, they'll be able to buy a house there. They'll have a car, they'll have a means of income. And so, we had to talk about those things while I was there. We want to make sure that they're taken care of. They will, in as much as possible in 2024, they'll visit their supporting churches on what I'm calling a final furlough. When missionaries come off the field, the normal practice is to go around, visit the churches and give a report and reconnect with the supporting churches. So even though the Wallies are coming back on the 31st of July, that's not the end of their ministry. They deserve that opportunity. And I don't think they'll get around to all churches because of Mrs. Wally's health, but certainly in the Midwest and so forth, they'll be able to go and say thank you to the churches and give a final report. And what I've done, I've sent a letter out to every church so that they know exactly what's happening. And the plan is, it could change, but the plan is that the Wallies will kind of end up back in Oak Harbor in August of 2024, and right at the time when we're going to be celebrating our 50th anniversary as a church. And not sure what we're going to do, but put on your seatbelts, it's going to be something good, I tell you that. And then after that, the Wallies will drive off into a well-earned retirement. And they'll probably leave our church, obviously join a church in Oklahoma, and that'll be the end of a formal relationship that we have. Of course, they're well part of this church, but it just makes sense. So that's the plans that we have for the Wallies. And just to give you a little rundown here of their life in the Philippines, they commenced their deputation to go there in October of 1976. They first arrived in the Philippines in May of 1979. They joined our church here in November of 1989, and they served on the island of Mindanao, which is the southernmost large island, which is primarily Muslim as well. Well, it's a mix of Muslim and Christian. They were there from May 1979 to July of 2016. Then they have been on Cebu, or in Cebu, from July 2016 until they leave this year, July 2023. And then they'll retire, Lord willing, August 2024. So that amounts to 48 years of dedicated service to the Lord. And I don't think anyone, I hope, would begrudge them a retirement. I know Brother Wally, especially, if he had his druthers, he would just die in the Philippines. But he also has a wife, and he needs to take care of her. And really, Brother Wally's getting tired too. He just doesn't know it. And so I know it's time. I know it's time. I've known that for a while, and so we went there to talk about these things, and I think everything is in place, and we're just excited for them to have this final time in their life. So do pray for the Wallies, and as I said afterwards, if you have any questions at the end, we'll try to answer those questions. Well, hope you brought a picnic lunch here tonight. Well, as I said, when you fly to the Fiji from the Philippines, you do have to go through, well, you don't have to, but it's the best way to go through Australia and flying from Brisbane. And so we flew into Brisbane. This was our little respite between the ministry. And so, yes, it was a great time of reconnecting with my family. And when we landed in Brisbane, we had quite a long layover. We got in from the flight in the early morning. We had a later afternoon flight, so my sister, Pam, and her husband picked us up at the airport and took us out, and we didn't go anywhere in particular. We just we went down to to Redcliffe and some of the areas there on the edge of the water. It's just a beautiful day, always is there in Brisbane, it seems. And we just chilled for the day, went out, got some coffee, went out and had fish and chips. All the things we miss, I guess, from that point of view. But we just had a good time reconnecting. That's my youngest sister. She's the youngest in my family. But they're a very adventurous couple. I'm not sure how much time they spend in church, but they've climbed to the base camp of Everett. They've crossed the Kokoda Trail. They've navigated by canoe just about every main river in Australia, and that's their kind of lifestyle that they live. But it's good to see her and, of course, spend time there. And then we went back to the airport the same day. I took a flight down from Brisbane to Albury in New South Wales, which is only 40 minutes drive from where my mother lives in Wangaratta. My mother and my other brother and sister live there. And so one of the reasons really was to see my mother. She's going to be 95 here in May, and so there's a picture of her second in from the left in the green. I think she looks pretty good, don't you? Yeah, she does have asthma, pretty much a constant thing in her life, but she's always huffing and puffing on an inhaler and other things. And she does have the occasional bad day. A lot of it's seasonal. I think while we were there, she had at least one day that she just said, I'm just going to stay in my chair and just sit. She knows what to do. She does get around with a walker. She also has a cane, and she still will drive her car, if not a whole lot, because my sister Alison, who's on the right, she's always there taking care of her, more of a caregiver. And then next to her is my sister-in-law, Mary Ann, who's married to my brother. And they're in town, so they're constantly checking in on her, which is a real blessing. And then on the left is my sister-in-law, who's married to my brother Gary, and they actually they live in Brisbane, but they were travelling down for a military reunion, and so they changed their plans to stay with us in Wangaratta. And the next slide is how they travel. He's retired, and they just travel and live in Brisbane and go all over the place in their caravan. That's Gary and Linnell. And so we got to see all of my siblings. We had transport while we're in Wangaratta, my mother's car, and I said to my wife, since you're going to be driving in Fiji, which they drive on the proper side of the road, I said, you need to drive in Wangaratta so that you can get used to that. And so it's not that difficult. She did really well. I don't think she turned the windscreen wipers on once, which is the usual thing. You know, when someone's there, they want to put the indicator on, the blinkers on, and they turn the wipers on instead because it's on the other side. But we got around, and it's just like old times. In fact, I was reading in the local paper about a cricket match, and I said, they're going to have the final here on Saturday. So we drove to the showgrounds, and sure enough, got to watch a cricket match, which for me was like, that's awesome. And and so we watched a pretty tedious game. It wasn't all that great, but the people there were so kind. We showed up, said, "Is there a game here?" And they said, "Oh yeah." And they gave us chairs to sit in under a shady tree. They came up and talked with us. I was able to reminisce with a fella about things that were from my childhood and people we knew. And then some lady came up and offered us ice creams and stuff. It was just a really great day. And I know you're all interested in the score, so I put the scoreboard up for you. And my team won. They also gave me a cap for the team. So we scored really well there. And it was just a really, it was just a great relaxing Saturday afternoon, something I've not really known for a long time, but just to sit there and enjoy a game of cricket. Excellent. I recommend it. Now, one of the things we also did, it's not a ritual, but I always go and visit my father's grave, and we visited, my mother came with us, and she said, well, do you want to see my mother's grave, and so forth. So I just put this up because the first slide here is my grandfather on my father's side, John Henry Sargent, and he lived for 85 years, and his wife Esther Ann, known as Dolly, she lived a little less, but they were very much in my growing up childhood. And then on my mother's side, my grandfather, he died relatively young due to the effects of the Second World War. And my mother's mother, she lived till 95. Last year, my mother's aunt died at 101. And I put this in because I'm counting on their genes, if you know what I mean. And praise the Lord, all of the Sargent side of things, the family side, are long livers. And so I hope I don't get liver disease. But we went there, and of course my wife loves this, all these cockatoos that are floating around everywhere, sitting on the graves. You can see all those birds there, the sulphur-crested cockatoo. So that was one thing we did, just for an hour, go to the cemetery, but these things you want to do when you go back to your home. We also had an Australian bush picnic, drove out for about an hour up into the hills and had a picnic out there, stinking hot day, flies everywhere, not used to that, but just sitting around and having a barbecue. Behind me there you'll see a lake, and Lake Lovell Hume, I think it's Lovell, and it's named after one of the explorers. Beautiful setting, and just a relaxing day. My wife and brother-in-law and sister went out kayaking, and they went down and they saw, an eagle's nest and all kinds of things. And I just stayed there in case there was a need to call emergency, so I didn't actually do that. I can't imagine how I could ever kayak, but anyway. And so we were able to do things like that. My wife went bike riding, and then in my mother's backyard, she has a couple of magpies that she feeds them every day, and so they come and they talk to her. They're just a magpie in Australia is those are the birds that they actually have warning signs, because at nesting season they come and they'll dive bomb you, and they've been known to peck you in the head or take your cap off, and they click their heels over you. It puts a lot of fear into school kids, I'll tell you that. But these are every day showing up, and she feeds them a couple of things and so forth. We made a trip to a town. It's not really even a town, it's just a spot on the map called Peachelbar. And this is really our ancestral home. This is where my grandfather raised 12 children on a farm back before the Second World War. And he was a farmer. And there is a road named Sargent Road, which I didn't know about. And of course I wanted to go there and see Sargent Road, thinking it was a super highway. Turned out it was a bush track that got worse and worse as we went along. And this is really family humor, but my brother went into a ditch and couldn't get out. And that's my brother Gary, the darker car. And we laughed about it because my father was notorious for going out to cut wood or to go rabbiting or something like that. He'd always get bogged. And he'd always have to come and get a tractor to pull him out, or dig a hole and dig out of that. And we were just laughing because here are 3 sons, and we're in the same predicament. So we couldn't get out. We tried different ways, so we finally called my youngest brother, Charles, and he came with his van and hooked it up and towed us out. Crazy things. But it was kind of funny from our point of view. Now, while we were at at Peachelbar. My wife and sister-in-law went to Peachelbar, and there is a place there where a lady takes care of injured animals, and so they got to go there, and they were actually waiting for us to show up, but we never did make it. Anyway, there were different birds, and of course some of you have heard about the kangaroos, little joeys, 6 weeks old, that their mothers were killed, hit by a car or something. They're rescued out of the pouch, and then they're nursed until they're able to be returned to the wild. And so my wife was just thrilled to be able to hold a kangaroo and see these different animals there. So we had a lot of just great time, family time, and I really appreciate it. I'm glad I decided to do that because it was a time to relax for a few days there. One of the highlights, however, was that as I was on the trip and I told a friend of mine I'm going to be there, he said, "Well, I want you to preach." So had another sermon to come up with, but this church, Heritage Bible Baptist Church, is actually a church that I helped start back before we moved to the US. I started it in my hometown. It had a different name at the time, but I worked a job and I started the church there, and Pastor Mark Bartleman is the pastor, but his dad and I worked together, and when I left the town, I turned the work over to his dad, and he became the pastor. And this is kind of the continuation, but since then they've been able to get a disused church building, a Church of England building, and I was just amazed. They've got a beautiful auditorium, and they had a great group of people. It was just a thrill to see that. People were coming. And Brother Mark is a faithful, Bible-believing Christian. I mean, you walk in, you know they're King James all the way. And it was a privilege to be able to preach there in my hometown. They also had an odd song leader. I mentioned the world's smallest song leader. The song leader here, he sits behind the keyboard. I was told he used to be, before he got saved, an Elvis impersonator. So he's a bit of a character. But he leads the singing as he plays. Brother Mark can't sing for anything, and they'll be singing a song, and then he'll just say, "Come on, church, let's sing it again." I love that. I mean, it's just so spontaneous. But we had a great time there, a great fellowship, a lot of people there, and I know that God spoke to some hearts there because Brother Bartleman was counseling with a woman about some things, and it was just a blessing. And it's only just around from where my mother lives, so that's a good church there in town, different than the Baptist church in which I grew up in, which has changed a lot. Well, that's enough of that, but after Wangaratta we drove up to Albury, said goodbye. Went up to Brisbane, and we had another long layover there. So we met a preacher friend of mine. He had contacted me once he heard I was coming, and I haven't seen him since the days we lived in Perth. And I've known him for many years, haven't seen him for a long time. And he and his wife picked us up, and we spent the day in Brisbane walking around, and he took us out to the church. I might have mentioned, I think in the men's breakfast yesterday, that when I met him and we shook hands, the first words out of his mouth are, "I'm leaving, do you want to take a church?" And that was kind of sad because, I'm hearing this all the time, as I mentioned to the men. Well, not all the time, but a lot of times, far too much. And he's coming back to the States, but this church here has been established for quite some time, and now they're going to be looking for a pastor. So we had a good time with them. We went out to dinner, and then they took us back to the airport, and then we flew across overnight to Fiji from Brisbane. And so that brings me to the next final phase here, and that is the country of Fiji. And for those who are perhaps new to the church, we've had a ministry there. We call it the South Pacific Baptist Outreach. And once the COVID pandemic came, the country literally shut down, I should say, and it was really a very difficult time. And so we went back there, and we had, there were some issues with getting into the country still as far as paperwork, and one of the things you have to do is you have to purchase a health insurance policy for 15 days so that while you're there in Fiji, you are covered in case you get COVID. The country doesn't have to pay anything to put you in hospital, put you up in a quarantine, or send you home, whatever it is. So we had to do that. We couldn't go there without showing that, and so that was different. And so we came to Fiji, and of course we've been there a number of times. It was good just to get back. And really what I was wanting to do there in Fiji was to kind of assess the situation, to meet up with the men that had been trained, to see where they were at, because we have an interest in that, and hopefully to get some information or some intelligence from some of the preachers that I knew there of what needs to be done. And in that regards, I think there was good success in what I had set out to do. Let me just say, before we get into this, that spontaneously on several occasions, people had said what a great job Brother Levi did for them. They were really appreciative of his time there and what he did, particularly in setting up the financial arrangement for the Christian school and the church there. And they said we still use it to this day. So they told me on a couple of occasions different people said that. And of course they also well remembered Brother Jeremiah. And we were wondering, well, what about the people that Brother Jeremiah had in his group when he turned them over to Victory Baptist Church and said, this is where you need to go because I have to leave the country. Did they do that? Did they fall away? What happens? Well, praise the Lord. The pastor, Brother Josepha, and some of the members told me, no, they're all still there. They're still faithful, and Brother David. Now, the sad thing is I wasn't able to get there to meet them. I wanted to do that, but we just didn't have time. And as far as the men who were trained, they're still raring to go. They're still involved in the ministry. But I did find that COVID had had an impact and things had changed a little bit in the country. During that time, one pastor, Pastor Navi Bola, had died, leaving a church in Bar. Another pastor that I knew is now, he was kicked out of the country and he's now in rehabilitation. He committed some crimes, and so his ministry's gone. And this is really sad to see this decimation of the ministry. And I could tell even the place we stayed, which is where we've stayed before, that they're still trying to recover from COVID. The facilities have certainly been run down, and not that we're complaining, but you could tell, and the service wasn't like it was. It's just like they're coming out of a bad time. But there has been an election, and all the preachers and Christians I talked to were happy that the new government is a lot more favourable to Christian ministry and so forth, and so that's a good thing. But the main church there that we spent time at, Nasori Baptist Church, is still going strong, and that's really where we were all of the time, but we did get to meet other preachers, as I'll explain. Now, we picked up a rental car at the airport, and my wife was thrilled to know it was a grey RAV4. Just the only difference was the steering wheel was on the other side. It's exactly like the car she drives here, so we drove. This is the first time we've driven in Fiji, but she did great. I mean, she didn't get on the wrong side of the road or do anything like that, and praise the Lord. Now, she had a navigator, that's me, and I said, take this way, and we ended up going down some old farming tracks and getting further and further out of civilization, but we got out of it. So we stayed at the same place that we've often stayed at. It's called a resort. I'd say it's more like a hostel. One good thing about it is they do have a pool, and it was nice. We actually invited the Rokadura family, the pastor and his family, to come across. We had the pool to ourselves and just sat around. We had dinner around the pool, and the kids were able to have a swim. That was a blessing. This is the pastor. Some of you have met him. Some of you have seen his picture, Brother Marla. And he got very critically ill a couple of years ago. He ate poisoned fish, and it really did a number on his internal organs, but he says he's doing fine. And so he heard that I actually had told him I was coming, but it wasn't until I was on the trip that he said, "Oh, I want you to teach preach at a preachers meeting on Saturday." Okay, I can do that. And then I want you to preach on Sunday. And then he come back, "Well, I want your wife to teach a class as well." So we had put things together, and on the Saturday we had a preachers fellowship. We had a couple of preachers come, and that was good because I was able to talk to them about, how do you see the needs here in Fiji and get a good feel for the country. And my wife had a ladies' meeting. The next slide, I think, shows, a couple of slides there. There's the preachers' meeting, and then the ladies, they met up in the Christian school area in the building there. And then Sunday I preached all day, and it was great to see old faces and so forth. Some of the pictures here of the song leader, Brother Christopher, and Brother Mally praying. These people love the Lord. You'd walk into that building that they meet in. It's you wonder how it hasn't fallen down. It's a government building that they're able to use for free, but they're not allowed to do any maintenance on it. And so it's an old courthouse that they meet in. But the people were there. The singing was great. It's always good to be there. And they take care of you as well. They feed you well, as you can see. This is very typical in these cultures that the guests, they get a tablecloth, they get better dishes and so forth, and they get all the good food while everybody else eats rice and a few things but all of that on the table is Fijian food. You can see right in the foreground the dalo and cassava, so things like that, which is good to eat. A couple of the families here, just to introduce you to them. The first one is Pastor Mala and his wife Christine standing behind him, and then his son Brandon and his daughter Lydia. Lydia plays the keyboard, and she is a fantastic musician. She really plays well. This is a blessing to see her. She's about 16, and she obviously has a talent. And then their young son Zach. And so that's the Rokadura family. He's the pastor at Nasori Baptist Church. Brother Simon. Brother Simon is the man who is going to Rotuma. And we'll show that on a map here in a little bit. But Brother Simon, this is his wife, Bali, Gia Walesi Bale Wakaham. So anyway, she goes by the name Bali. Then there are 4 children, Hannah Grace, Abriana Jewel, Tatiana Faith, and Christine Bernadette. So he is trying to finish up some paperwork before he can actually go there. And in the meantime, he runs the finances of the school, the finance office, and he's very, very busy. And so continue to pray for Brother Simon. He is a good man, and he's Rotuman. And the difference between the Rotumans and the Fijians are Melanesian, and the Rotumans are Polynesians, but it's all part of the same country. And so it's a different language, but he knows how to speak the language, and he'll go up there eventually. 2 of the other men here on the left is Brother Landua and his wife Meridani, and their 2 children, Abigail and Salote. They are going hopefully to Lambasa, which is on the northern part of the second largest island to the north. But while he's waiting to get there, he's currently ministering on the main island at Barotu, along with Brother Jope. Jope is a young man that's, I've known him since the first time I think we went to Fiji. And so he's there now. And so while they're waiting to go where they believe God would send them, they're being very busy in the church there. And then this other picture is of Christopher and his wife Fulori, Whippy. And he wasn't one of the original men, but he is trained by Jeremiah, and he is thinking about going back to Savu, which is on the southern part of the second main island, and doing a work there. So these men are keyed up to go and ready to go. And then one other man who's single, Josesi Mata Raya Bethi, he goes by the name of Bethi, he's going already to Koravu, which is on the main island. And so these men are serving the Lord, very, very active. Most of them work in the Christian school in some capacity, so they're there all the time. They live there, many of them, and they're wanting to go out. So this is good for that church, and we've had a part in their training. And of course, they're under the authority of that church, not our church. I also met Brother Nathani, or Junior, as he's usually known. Brother Nathani is one of the ones that went to Victory Baptist after Jeremiah left, and he's still there. His family's still there. They've grown, of course. And Brother Junior he's one of the trustees on our South Pacific Baptist outreach that's registered with the government there. We met up with Brother Roney and his wife, Orma. He just came for a visit. Once he heard I was preaching, he wanted to come, and so we went out to breakfast. That's Brother Roney in the foreground opposite his wife, Orma. They're from Nandi. Now his church, that's no longer where it once was, and he's building a house up in the hills, and they have church when it doesn't rain, and it's just a handful. And this is what we found, like the church, Victory Baptist Church, they have to meet in the afternoons in another building because they've lost their building. And the churches have taken a step back. I think with COVID there's been an impact on them, and while they're holding on faithful, they've definitely stepped back. And one of the things that we can do, as we've done in the past, is to be an encouragement to them and to be a help to them wherever we possibly can. And I know in Nandi, the church there has definitely diminished, and they lost a lot of people and so forth. One of the reasons they were in Nassori is to bring their son, Marshall, and put him in the Christian school. It's a boarding school. And so I've known Marshall since he was a little boy, and Brother Dave Perez actually bought him that guitar because he's left-handed. And so he still plays, and he's still faithful, and he's there in his senior year, I think, in the Christian school, and living there. They have an academy there, Nassori Baptist Christian Academy. And for the sake of our own young people, we have some pictures of their schoolroom. And while it's a lot hotter and fans are on and everything else, they still have their offices, they still have their cards, and they just have different names on the cards there in the name of the student in the office. I'm not even going to try to pronounce this girl's name. If you can just switch there, Brother Don. There we go. You can look at it. Now, this was the first day of school. School starts normally it starts at the end of January. They started a week or so early. And there's a picture of some of the girls there. They wear school uniforms in the schools in Fiji and so forth. So, we just got to visit with a lot of people. That was all we had time to do. But let me just show you on a map here of Fiji these different areas. Now, up in the north there is Rotuma. I'll put a little circle around that. That's quite a distance, and that's where Brother Simon hopes to eventually move with his family. And the society works differently in the Fiji. He's kind of a chief, and a chief kind of calls the shots in the village and owns the property. And so he has land up there and he has a lot of influence up there, so he should be able to do a good job, and he's already led people to Christ. He's made trips up there. We've helped pay for the airfare and so forth up there, and people are saved. They're just waiting for him to come. In the northern part of the second island is Lambasa. It's not named there on the map, but that's where it's roughly located. And there are souls there have been won through our ministry, and we're wanting to get men up there. And then down in the southern part is Savu, and so that's where Brother Christopher would like to go. That's where he's from. And then on the main island is Korovo, which is where Brother Bethy is already ministering there. So these are some of the areas in Fiji. But I want to finish up by just talking about one place. As I was asking the pastors, are there places where churches need to be started? It's kind of a dumb question in a way, because you can't go anywhere in any country where there's not a need somewhere, but I wanted to get their feedback and so forth. And so I met a man at the church in Nassori who actually lives in Navua, and he lives in Navua, but he commutes to Nassori where he works. His wife has a job in Navua, and they're about an hour and a half apart. But he said, we just got married, and their home is in Navua, and he has a burden for that place, so he's opened up his home to have a little Bible study. He's already got some people coming. He says, we need a church there. And that really got my attention. So you can see, this is not this is off the internet map, but you can see where Suva is down on the bottom, and the Queen's Road goes all the way around to Nandi, and Navua is there. Oh yeah, thank you very much. Okay, so that's this town. So on the way back to the airport, I asked if we could meet with him, and he could take us around and show us some of this place. It's on a beautiful river, the Navua River, that flows down to the sea, and you can see that. And if you go further upstream, it's a very famous whitewater rafting venue for adventurers going up into the hills. And it's a good-sized town, but it's spread out, and as you drive on the highway, you don't see a whole lot. A lot of it's back off the highway. And so we went to the place where his wife works, and she works for a government office, and we met the director who was in charge, and like a typical Fijian answer, we said, we're looking at wanting to reach out with the gospel, and she says, oh, that's great, yeah, we all worship the same God, and yeah. But she instructed one of her officers to take us on a tour, and they misunderstood a little bit, but they took us to some of the settlements. And in Fiji you have villages, and in this case in Navua, to go into a village you have to get permission from the chief. And a lot of times the chief is living in America or somewhere else, but you just can't walk in, but you can get permission. They're usually quite good, but then the settlements are more like squatter places where people have just moved in and built shanties. And so we drove through there for a while, and here's a couple of pictures just to give you an idea. A lot of children there. Your mind begins ratcheting up. Children's ministries. Wow, we could get in there and we could gather the children and teach them, and then bring the adults in. I mean, you just start thinking that way. There's another picture there of some of the structures. People are living in these, and they're all over the place. And Navua is quite an influential city. There was a church there, but it's defunct, and it's no longer a sound church. Whatever's still there, and there's a great need there. And I came back with somewhat of a burden that this would be a place that we could look at. We need to get someone over there, and Brother Solomon, as you know, he's anxious to go. So when he gets back from Thailand, maybe he'll have changed his mind with all the heat and everything, but I doubt it. And we want to look at, say, well, okay, Nauvoo, it's not far from Suva. We could get a house there. We could set up our printing ministry, because that's very much needed in Fiji to print and to translate into Fijian. There's a great work that could be done there, but also at the same time, work at starting a church, and you've already got people who are meeting for a Bible study. And this next slide is Brother Henry Burt and his wife Julia, and they're newly married, and they have opened up their home. So this is how churches often start. You have a seed there that people are wanting to do something, and you can come in and begin to teach and preach, and you've already got contacts. So I'm excited about that, because that's what I really was praying for, not just to see how these men are doing that are going to go out, but what can we do in the future? And we'll not duplicate or replicate what Brother Jeremiah did. I mean, people over there just say what he did was amazing, and I believe that's true, but there's still a work to be done, and I know that we can do a great work there. So I want you to start praying for Nauvoo, and who knows what will happen. But that's probably where we will focus our attention and see what happens from that point. Well, after we visited the settlements and drove around for a while, it was time to head back to Nandi to catch our flight. But we always have to stop off at our favourite stopping point on the Coral Coast. And even though it was a very windy day, we love to stop there. There's a jetty that goes out, and we went out there and got blown to bits, but there were some kids there and so forth. And that night we caught our flight, flew to Los Angeles, then back up into Seattle, and we got in on the 26th of January, which is Australia Day. Thought you'd like to know that. All right, so that's the extent of the trip. I know that's a lot. We're 7:30, so. But if you have any questions, I'd like to entertain those, mainly concerning the plans that we have for these two ministries in the Philippines as well as in Fiji. Is there any questions? Yes, Brother Hunt. Brother David I was told he is still faithful, but because they meet in the afternoons, he wasn't able to come to the meetings that I was preaching at. So I was disappointed about that, because I've never met the guy. He's the Chinese man that was led to Christ, and he's works there in Fiji, and he's been a great blessing to the ministry, and he still is, I was told. Yes, brother.
How do you see our church interacting and continuing in the Philippines with the young couple that's taking over for the walls? Are we going to have a financial?
Yes, in our budget that we passed at the meeting, in the church administration meeting, in the missions budget, Brother Howard had put in a figure. Brother Wally had given us a figure. It's mainly for the continual rent of the house and other supplies, and a small salary for Brother Jericho and Ann. And it comes to, well, initially it was like, I think about $1,600 a month, I think. I may be wrong there. When I got there, I talked to him about that. We went over the finances, and we forgot this and we forgot that. So it's roughly about close to $2,000 a month. Now, we're not going to start that until the Wallies leave. So for this year, it's sort of prorated to be half that amount, $1,000 a month. We're setting up a different account so that those funds can be wired there, and Brother Jericho, I don't want to put a big financial burden on them to account for everything, but I will have some accounting coming back so that we know that, and I have no doubt they will, but we know that they're spending the money as it's intended, and to keep that ministry going, yes. And that'll be one of our regular mission projects. Any other questions? Yes, Brother Simon. Where? Oh, Nauvoo. Okay, yeah. Yes, well, obviously we'd like to send a team, and maybe that's not possible. My thinking is, and I have to still think it through, and we need to talk about it among ourselves, but one of the things, there's plenty of fellowship there and encouragement, mutual fellowship, but I've come to see that sometimes staying in those countries can be, you need to keep it short. So maybe 2 years on, 2 years off, and at least for the moment, before we can get enough men who can go there and work together as a team together, maybe having one group go, one family go, and then being relieved for a couple of years, because it's tough on Westerners. It's nothing against the country, it's just the climate, it's tropical. And living in the tropics and putting up with the humidity and the mold and everything else that grows overnight, it's not easy to live there. And so, I think it will work better. I'm thinking this through. I'm thinking out loud, okay? So don't say that, well, this is what we're going to do. But yes, we need to have a plan so that we don't cause discouragement from someone just saying, well, I'm here and nobody's coming and this and that. So that's the plan. But if you are volunteering, we'll talk about that later, okay? Yes, brother.
You had mentioned, anyway, the banking order in Fiji, were you able to?
No, I didn't have time to. We still have a bank account there. It's got some money in it. But when you go to the bank in Fiji, you don't just walk in and do your business. You sit there, take a number, and wait probably for half a day. And so I just didn't have the time for any of that. So that's for another day, but it's still quite safe and everything. So yes, Brother Levi.
So just to be clear, it's Brother Henry and his wife who are commuting to Nassori?
Brother Henry is commuting to Nassori. His wife stays in Navua, and he comes home. I'm not even sure, I don't think he even comes home every night because of the travel, but he made a special trip for us. And for you, and I think anyone else that's been to Fiji, Nauvoo is right where the Grace Kitchens, the Grace Farm is. And this is a Korean cult run by a woman. And she has this idea that Fiji is in the center of the world, and that's where Christ is going to establish his kingdom. And so they have a big farm there, dry rice farming and all kinds of vegetables. And she's in jail right now in Korea, but her son's running it. But the good thing about it is if you want to go to a nice restaurant where you feel like it's a lot more like a coffee shop here or something, you can go there and you can get some good food. And they're very nice people. Most of them can't speak English, they're all Korean, but there's always someone that can take your order. And I'm not opposed to eating in those places, but Nauvoo is the center of their operation. And they've since built this huge, almost you'd think it's like a big Costco building that you can go in, and a lot of the Westerners will go there to get their supplies. My wife, she checked it all out, and she said, well, most of it's all Korean food, so I guess they're just setting it up. But that was something that was different. Yes, Josh.
In your mind, what do you see as the end goal of the ministry in Nauvoo? At least as of right now.
Starting a church. Yeah. The printing side of things is necessary, but it's not to go there to start a printing ministry. But the churches need materials, very much so, just like in the Philippines, and they need materials that have been translated. Brother Marla has been translating the booklet on church history for the Word of God and for the testimony of Jesus Christ. He's about halfway through, and I said, come on, Brother Marla, what's going on? He said, well, my computer, it's broken, I can't do it. So I went out and bought him a new laptop and said, now you can do it. And I told a few of his men, I said, now, because they said every day after school, he would go into his office for 1 hour, and he would translate and he would read it out loud to one of the other brothers, and they would then type it up. And we need to get that book done. The translation work is very important, but that's always a slow process. Any other questions? Yes, Joel?
Do you have a podcast of the faith over there?
I don't think so. And City Baptist, they're a shell of their former self, and they don't have a place to meet either. I mean, they're meeting in people's homes and stuff. It was kind of sad to see a lot of these churches, and they weren't necessarily big churches, but since COVID, it's kind of done a number on the whole country, including the churches. But greater days are ahead, I think. All right. Any other questions? Right. Well, I've spoken enough, and I hope that that was an encouragement to you. And if you have questions later on, I'll try my best to answer them. And just continue to pray for the Wallies, and definitely pray for the opportunities, the open doors that I think are there in Fiji for us as well. Well, let's stand and we'll be dismissed. Thank you for your patience tonight. Hope you have a good week this week, and God blesses your blesser and gives you opportunities to be a blessing to someone else. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we do thank you for what we've been able to share tonight. I pray, Lord, that as we think of our church's commitment to the Great Commission and the need to get the gospel out, Lord, I want to thank you for the Wallies and their faithful service over the years, and I pray that this last phase of their ministry would go without any issues or problems, and that, Lord, you would just bless them for their faithfulness as you have done. And we pray, Lord, for Jericho and Ann and for the continuation of that ministry there, that, Lord, you'd be in every detail of that, and it would have a tremendous continuing impact among the churches there in the Philippines and around in Southeast Asia. And Lord, for the country of Fiji, we thank you, Lord, be able to go back there, and I pray, Lord, that we can be an encouragement in some way to these churches, but Lord, that you would open the doors, and Lord, as we think of this town, Navua, Lord, what a great opportunity that is set before us. Help us, Lord, to have the means and the wherewithal that we can do something about that, and I pray, Lord, that you continue to lead and guide and direct our church in that regard. I pray for your blessing on us as we dismiss. Lord, may you have your will and way in our lives this week. We ask it in Jesus' name and for his glory. Amen. Thank you very much.